Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. And we start today with a wonderful song from the Edinburgh Festival Fringe production of 2022's Living with Sin, called Cece's Lament.
Considered that this house has lots of rooms, that's lots of work.
That's lots of work.
Work you don't have to do at all. Why don't you sell?
Why don't you sell?
Say yes, I'll put it on the market. Find you a new place much less morbid. You can thank me when it's sorted.
We'll raise a glass to you, poor Cece.
When you finally buy your place in the
We
world,
will find
a flat
you
that's cozy,
a house
somewhere
of home,
trendy that
a place of
millennials
your
will
own.
envy.
I can't wait to see that person you could be.
Considered that the reason you're still single might be you.
It's probably you.
Perhaps your standards are too high, just bring them down.
All the way down.
I know a nice boy you would suit him. He's not what you'd call a fitty. Can you really be so picky?
Raise a glass to you, poor Cece.
When you leave your single days behind,
We will find you,
even though
boys
some
and
men are
girls.
scorned for it, they'll introduce you.
I can't bear to think of you all on your own. Dying womb.
You don't even need a man, not anymore.
Who needs a
I
man?
know a clinic with good donors. You can find parental bliss. Just order sperm right off a list.
We'll raise a glass to you, poor Cece.
When you finally reach the female goal,
We'll find
when
you
you've grown
sperm
up in the
and
person
sperm
you will
and
love you
lots
like
of
you
sperm.
could.
I can't wait to see the parent you could be. Poor Cece never could see the person she might one day grow to be. If only she'd known what her grandma had known, I guess we'd have to help her see. We'll raise a glass to you, poor Cece. When you find that she might one day grow to be. If only she'd known you was grandma known, I guess to see the person you see. We can't wait to see the person.
We can't wait to see that person.
We can't wait to see that person you could be.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos and I was thinking recently that in that iconic scene from the film Singing in the Rain, where Gene Kelly creates a legendary and iconic moment from the world of musical film, we often forget that he was seen on his way by a police officer. And that suggests there was some kind of infraction of the law, and that the film might be better renamed Sinning in the Rain. Well, as Johnny Mercer says in his wonderful lyric for the song Accentuate the Positive, I feel a sermon coming on here. The topic will be sin, and that's what I'm agin. Except I'm not agin sin when it's the core of a fabulous show, a fabulous musical show. And you've already heard one of the songs from it. The show we're going to be talking about today is called Living with Sin. And it was a show that I saw at last year's Edinburgh Festival Fringe, and it was brilliant. I went into it not really knowing what to expect, but I came out of it delighted, and it's a show that stayed with me, which for me is always a sign of something with some quality. Even a year later after having seen it, Living with Sin comes back to me every now and then because of the questions it threw up and the ideas it was playing with. Now, at the top of the programme today, you heard the opening number from the show called Cece's Lament. Cece is the central character, and she starts the show going to the funeral of her grandmother, who was her principal guardian. And as the blurb for the show goes on to say, she then spirals into a quarter-life crisis. Lost, lonely and looking for purpose, she finds support from some unexpected house guests, the 7 deadly sins. As Cece goes on a journey of self-discovery, she begins to question if living with sin is not so deadly after all. And that is a good summary of what the show was about. The conceit, as you've heard, is that Cece, who's having a bit of a crisis, finds that she's living in a house with the physical embodiments of the 7 deadly sins. Now, the 7 deadly sins have appeared in musical theatre on a number of occasions, and of course, possibly, I would argue, the most famous being Kurt Weill and Bertolt Brecht's version of the 7 deadly sins, which you could have seen at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe in 2021 as one of its video offerings, and which we here on Musical Talk reviewed at that time. But Living with Sin is, I think, a much more contemporary and a much more interesting take on those sins, the famous 7 deadly sins. Now, the company we have to thank for it was the Cambridge University Musical Theatre Society, CUMTS, and as you'll hear, you do have to be terribly careful on how you pronounce that. And if you think you've heard their name before, you probably have, because they're the company that originated Six. And that's done rather well. And it's not been lost on some of us that the show 6 has been followed up with a show that relates to 7, because the number of deadly sins, of course, is 7. Now, for my money, and please don't write in to tell me I'm wrong, I think Living with Sin, although an unfinished production at the time I saw it in Edinburgh last year, had more potential. I thought it was a better dramatic piece. Which is not to say that 6 is anything other than wonderful for what it is, but 6 sits very firmly within its conceit of being a rock concert, whereas I think Living with Sin is a fully fledged piece of musical theatre art. And I'd love to see it develop further, and I'd love to see it again in almost any form. It was written by Gabrielle James and Joshua Newman, and it was Joshua who wrote the songs. And during the course of this programme, we'll get to hear 2 more. Now, the recordings are demo recordings, which were actually made in 2021 during lockdown, so all done virtually. But they do give you a very good sense of the songs from the show and the tone of the show that comes from those songs. There's a kind of jazzy, I'm going to say almost looseness, but I don't mean that in a negative sense, which I think helps underpin the idea of somebody living in a house full of people representing the 7 deadly sins, and learning to live with them and themselves. And that's the essential message, I think, of Living with Sin. Now, when I saw the show in Edinburgh, as I say, my little socks were blown off because I was stunned by how good it was and how enjoyable it was. As I say, it was cram-packed with good ideas and interesting concepts, and such an interesting idea backed the whole show. And on top of that, the songs were excellent. As I say, I'd really like to see it develop further. But when the show was over, I had a chance to sit down with the director, Ilona Sell, and she and I had a fabulous conversation about Living with Sin. So in just a minute, that's what you're going to hear, the conversation I had with Ilona, the director of the show. But before that, let's hear another song from this wonderful score for this wonderful show, and that's called Make This House My Home. Enjoy.
I have been doing my best to remember the things that I know about her to be true. Not just stories I'm told, but memories I hold, looking back on the things that we do. As my mother, she raised me, my grandma, she gave me her wisdom and all that she knew. If she stood here today, no sky would turn grey, 'cause she'd know how to help me get through. In moments like this, I turn to you. You could fill me with courage in simply the time to make tea. You'd throw me one glance and know every word that I need. This house just isn't my home without you around. If you're the one who's moved on, then why am I here? The ghost haunting this place. How can I let go? I took her for granted, I know, as the young do the old, not believing that life is on loan. Did I really think she'd stop aging and wait so we could spend our last days growing old? But this world will keep turning without her, I know. Though my world feels much smaller as she was the place I'd call home. In moments like this, without you, who will fill me with courage in simply the time to make tea? Who'll throw me one glance and know every word that I need? I can't make this house my home without her around. If she's the one who's moved on, why am I still here? The ghost haunting this place, I need to let go. But where do I go? I'm still waiting for you to say what to do. CC, time to grow up. CC, time to be brave. Make your mistakes and learn how to fail. Don't let yourself doubt. Limit what's there, asking what if you fall? CC, what if you saw? CC, take the lead. Just believe. So long to fill me with courage and simply the time to make tea. I won't need your glasses, I'll learn every word that I need. I will make this house my home without you around. Though you're the one who's moved on, how I wish you'd stay here. The ghost haunting this place to watch as I grow.
Well, my name's Ilona Sell, and I'm director and co-choreographer of Living with Sin, which is a CUMPS-funded musical here at the Edinburgh Fringe.
Now, we have to say this very carefully. CUMPS.
CUMPS, Cambridge University Musical Theatre Society. Yeah, difficult acronym.
Yes, absolutely. But they've been going for years.
Yes, very
and they're
long time.
frequently represented up here in Edinburgh.
Yes.
Now, the show is called Living with Sin.
Uh-huh.
And, of course, that's a very open title.
Yes.
Would you care to give us a little explanation of what it is the show's about? And then we can take it from there, I think.
Absolutely. So the show's about a woman called Cece, who's in her sort of mid-20s, and she's at a place in life where she's kind of in a state where she doesn't quite feel like anything's going right with her. The way in which she's like measured success, none of those means are fulfilled. And then she loses her grandmother, who was, this is all before the show starts, by the way, who's basically the most important person in her life. So moves back into her childhood home, and then discovers that the 7 deadly sins are living in her house and are here to help her improve her life. And the kind of music style is quite jazzy, and yeah.
Now, I'll tell you what's interesting to me is, of course, I mean, we can't avoid this elephant in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Kurt Weill had a go at the 7 deadly sins some time ago and did them in a very distinctive way.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is the 7 deadly sins with their hair down, I think would be the nicest way of describing it. It's they are, in fact, much less deadly because they are represented by people. There are 7 people in the room, in the house in which she lives, the house she's inherited now from her grandmother, and they are all... they all represent something of the characteristic that they are, their sin, but they're actually a force for good individually and together. That's a really interesting twist. I really like that idea of inverting the 7 deadly sins as actually a way of freeing you up to explore who you are. I think there's a line towards the end about through sin you can actually make mistakes and then learn. I can't remember the exact lyric, but it was. I thought, oh well, that's the point, isn't it? It is only by getting things wrong, failing, committing sins in the broadest sense of that we can advance as individuals and humans. And humanity is a very important thing in this as well. I mean, not least through the humanisation of the 7 sins.
Yes.
I've done a lot of talking there, but how did it come about? And when did that concept come about before almost the show? That's such an interesting concept.
So that's a credit to Joshua and Gabrielle, the writers, completely. And like one of our taglines is like, not so deadly after all.
Well, that's right. I mean, yes.
And I think all the sins, one of their ideas from the start was to give all the sins, except pride, a sin name and like a human name. So like envy is called Emmy and referred to like by sort of her friends, through the sense that they wanted to not depict a stereotype of a sin, but depict an actual human character who'd almost grasped that sin in the best way possible, who had like just the right level of it for a healthy life. Because if someone had no pride at all, that like wouldn't be positive either.
It's terrible, yes.
It's about like striking this balance and like understanding that being wrathful or being proud or something is still really positive. Like whoever you are, you just need to get it to the right balance, and trying to show them as people instead of like a stereotype.
I think you've hit it absolutely on the head there. It's the sins almost on the equaliser, on the soundboard, but actually you have to phase them up and down because all those sins are on a spectrum. And as you say, the opposite of these things, if you have no anger at all, you're likely to be walked over.
Yes, completely.
If you avoid food through avoidance of gluttony, you will starve to death quite quickly. So I
think particularly when the central figure is like a woman in her mid-20s who feels like all these expectations upon her, being like, you should be angry, you should be proud, you should be a bit gluttonous, I think is quite a positive message.
Yes, so she's, I wouldn't describe our central character Cece as passive per se, but she is lost.
Definitely lost. She's someone I think who's been waiting to have a career and to have a long-term relationship, and feels that those are sort of the measures for her own success at the start of the show. So when she loses her only real family that she has left, and then isn't feeling like she's meeting any of these criteria for being successful or for being happy, I think she just feels a bit like she's free-falling and doesn't understand what ties she has to provide her with an identity.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it is her journey, but she is also the character upon which the others are performing their magic, as it were.
Yes.
So it's an interesting character, isn't it, of having a central but fairly... I don't want to say bland, because that sounds like I'm underselling the actress who was amazing, but not that. But I'm going to give the parallel that seems a little bit off the wall, but Tintin, from the Tintin books, is a character with very little character, upon which, and surrounded by interesting other characters, or full of personality, Captain Haddock, Professor Calculus, and various others. But you, the reader, I think, project your interests in that character upon that character. So Tintin is interesting to those people who like Tintin, and I'm one of them, because Tintin is the character I think. But if you ever talk what the character of Tintin is to someone else, I have a different idea.
Yes.
I wonder if it's a fairly loose parallel, but I do get that kind of sense that she's a character on whom she's a palette.
Yes.
On which paint is being mixed, not finalised, mixed, and I like that a lot. It's quite, once again, everything here has been interesting, and it's nicely balanced, because it could be very easy that she's nothing and then she's something, or it could be very easy that the 7 deadly sins are too much of what they are. It would be very easy to be the full gluttony, the full anger, the full wrath. Some of these are directorial choices, of course, and I want to talk about how it came to be, but there's another thing I want to talk about in the immediate aftermath of having seen the show, is the interesting choice of how the 7 deadly sins act together as a collective. There's something out of Bob Fosse in the way they dress. There's something out of Bob Fosse to a degree in the way they move. And they have that kind of slinky 20s, 30s sound matched with a kind of slinky 60s look, if that makes sense. And it's all very different. They're all very delineated. They all wear very different clothing. And yet they fit together beautifully. But there is a sense, I don't know, if you told me they live together in a speakeasy when they're not in the grandmother's house, I'd absolutely buy that.
Well, there was quite a mixture of a palette for coming up with this all, with Ramisa, our costume designer, who's incredible.
Yes, I should say.
We basically came up with the idea that these sins are kind of eternal, and they've been in this house or maybe somewhere else for a very long time, and we're currently at modern day, but because of their own confidence and like how many different styles of clothes they've lived through, they've all picked up their favourite bits. So whilst we're in modern day, they choose the things they want to keep, hence the like visually mixed aesthetic in terms of period. And then with the choreography, myself and the other choreographer Fionn wanted to kind of pull away from what feels like really tight, sort of, not for want of a better word, like cheesy, and move towards like taking inspiration from like Thos and also from more distorted, like broken forms of movement to create like a language that felt more complicated and that allowed them to like flow and move as one being as well as like individuals.
The timelessness of it, very much so. I mean, that the clothing absolutely represents that, and the movement. I think you're right. It's interesting you mentioned the word cheesy there, because I am still, and this is a conversation I shall have with many people over the many years I hope yet to live, Bob Fosse is amazing, and yet also I can't work out if he's actually sending himself up or being sincere, or both, or all, and whether his choreography is brilliant or cheesy or terrible or magnificent. And I have a feeling it's a bit of everything. There's certainly a lot of cheese in it if you want the cheese.
Yes.
But it's not. I'm not suggesting for 1 second it's a Bob Fosse knockoff, because it absolutely isn't. And you've already explained, but it's actually much more complicated than that. They are 7 parts of a whole.
Yes.
With a W.
Yeah. No. Well, my background in terms of dancing is more in sort of movement than like choreography, whereas Fion's got a lot of choreography experience, so it worked quite well together. But I thought that the idea of like taking influence from styles like babbling, which is the idea of moving your body like a baby learning to talk, so trying out every possible way of moving each part of your body and
experimenting.
Yeah, really. And in ways it never been before.
Yeah.
Exactly, and the idea that also if these sins have been alive for so long, they're probably a bit restless. They're probably wanting to like adventure with the way in which they inhabit space more so than like someone else. So, and then allowing them to like through these new paths of movements find interactions with each other and sort of breathe as one was something we really worked out, which I think was a lot of fun.
Well, I think, funny enough, I think that comes across. I really do. I think, as I say, they work. I mean, they work together as a collective and they work together as individuals. And the fact that they feel like they can be both in 50 minutes is actually pretty impressive. And they're not on for the first 10 minutes.
No.
But what an entrance they do make. Essentially, I must tell you, of course, because although the title, there's a clue in the title, there are other sevens connected with loss, because it essentially starts with bereavement. Cece is at the funeral of her grandmother, as you say, her only real significant relative, certainly the one who's cared for her. I think there's a mother who's gone, and we're never told any more than that. So, and there's a very strong sense that she's not at the funeral.
Yes.
So Cece is essentially alone with friends and well-wishers, i.e. us, the audience. I mean, that's a nice conceit, but bereavement, I thought it was going to be, first of all, an exploration of bereavement, and of course at one level it is. But of course the thing we know about bereavement is it has 7 stages. And when I saw 7 performers come on, the very first thing I thought was, are these personifications of the 7 stages of grief? They're not quite. They are the 7 deadly sins. But of course they are tackling, the 7 stages of grief are human responses to tragedy. These characters have that sense of having had tragedy, knowing of tragedy, and are helping to pull Cece from tragedy. So although they are not the 7 stages of grief, they are acting almost as avatars with it. There seem to be parallels, I thought.
Well, interestingly, one of our actors, Ashley, has been telling people flying on the mile. We overheard her describing the play the musical as a unique exploration of grief, which we signalled might be a little bit misleading, but is also like pretty accurate actually, in that it ultimately is someone's path out of grief and towards like more security in herself from that. But it is definitely a very unique way of getting to that conclusion.
Well, I would say that. But the show is unique. It's one of the many things I liked about it. Also, and you touched on this as well, and I like to talk about the songs and the music. Obviously, as I say, there's this kind of speakeasy 20s, 30s feel that I had, and you've mentioned that as well, or certainly you feel that it could come from there. So when they arrived, they looked like a collected but ad hoc group of slightly sexy dancers, to be brutal. I use the word slightly there in no way to diminish the levels of sexiness on offer. What I mean is, of course, also they're doing much more than that. There are personifications, and it's an acting role as well as a movement role. So, but the music is varied, but there's always that kind of. It could have been written in the 1940s. It's got that feel and tone to it. Particularly, if I may say, the song where I think she's Gluttony. She's called G, isn't she?
Yeah, G. Ashley.
It's her human name. Sings, if you like, the song that almost really sort of brings Cece round.
Yeah.
I mean, I could have heard Ella Fitzgerald or Billie Holiday singing a song like that.
She's a beautiful singer.
Oh, she has a lovely voice.
Stunning.
Yes, don't worry about that. Yes, quite. Yes. So, was that deliberate? Was it always intended that it would have that kind of feel musically?
I think so. So Joshua, who's like created the concept and then all the music, they have a very like technical mind and have all these different references that there are little nods to throughout. And also I think took inspiration from The Wild Party as a sort of similar sound and similar...
The Lipper version, or because there's two?
Oh, I can tell you to be
Right,
honest,
okay.
but I'm sure
A version of The Wild Party?
Joshua definitely could. I could show you the album on Spotify after, but... Yeah, I think there was always quite a big part of it having this distinctive sound that, and also like about subverting traditional like musical theatre elements. Like she has no love interest.
No,
the
I
kind
love
of rockiest number is all women. It's like a women-led cast really, and creating these roles and new ways of finding a journey and like giving different people the like spotlight. I think is quite fun.
Well, everyone seems to get a go. Which
Yes,
is nice.
yes.
I mean, it's just a good ensemble piece, isn't it? And you're right. I mean, it does have a very strong female presence in the cast. 5, I think it is, of the 7 deadly sins are, using the old-fashioned money, obviously women. There are 2 fellas in that lineup.
We have, well, they've got one man and then one person who's non-binary.
Thank you. But I was going to say that person, and I hope I'm not offending anyone
No.
by that, but
Jaden.
was yes, who's Pride?
Yes, they're
lovely.
playing Pride.
Thank you. Yes, well, and who's almost the leader of the pack.
Pride is described
Yeah.
as like the unofficial leader of the
Yeah.
sins.
And they dress in what I'm going to describe as an androgynous kind of a way. There's
Yes.
a little bit of everything there. So, with the greatest respect, and forgive me, I hope
no.
I haven't said anything inappropriate, but that was the balance. So it is the spectrum once again. That was the point, and I think works very nicely. There's also sweetness amongst the 7 in Sloth. Or Sloth. And I can't remember what her real...
Soph and-
the human character, yes. Well, Soph and
played
Sloth.
by Hebe, yeah.
Oh, well, there you are then. Yes, so she has a very sort of sweet kind of
does.
character, and is not old enough to be motherly, but still has those instincts, or so it comes across.
Absolutely,
So, you
yeah.
know, once again, they represent all the facets of humanity. Or so it seems. Yes, I'll keep coming back to the same point. I think, but I hope it's right kind of thing. So, how did it come to be? I suppose that's the you know we've been through quite a lot of what one can see and one
Yeah.
can hear. But what was its genesis as a piece?
So, the genesis of a piece comes far before I've ever been involved. So
Oh, really?
Completely.
It was commissioned by George III.
Well, me describing this is I'm gonna get some stuff wrong, so just forgive me. But my understanding is that Joshua and a friend came up with the concept and got it going. I think I want to say about 5 years ago, but I really don't know.
Pre-COVID, we'll cover that.
That's what I can tell you. Pre-COVID, because there's a SoundCloud demo, and every person recorded it individually in their room under a duvet, and then Joshua pieced it all together to make the demo because it was in COVID. And then the other original composer, I think, stepped away. It was Joshua. They worked on it but COVID kind of halted everything, and then Gabrielle came into the picture while she was at Cambridge doing her masters, and at which point she was writing the book, and they decided to apply for this CUNTS funding, got it, and it absolutely accelerated along. But also it's originally meant to be 90 minutes, so it's been really cut down for Fringe.
Well, I did wonder, I was going to ask, I would have guessed, and you can tell me I'm wrong actually, but I would have guessed in a fuller version we might have got more songs for the individual sins with CC. There's several ensemble numbers or duets and trios, and G gets I was going to say a solo with...
Yeah.
I mean, because
A solo with all
CC
the
isn't singing. Yeah, exactly. But with a little bit of chorus backing as well. Yeah, it's quite... But it's essentially a solo... and I was assuming there'd be a little bit more one-on-one interaction, which would make sense, because obviously CC has to sort of work through each of the 7 deadly sins. It would be strange if you said, well, I'm taking 5, but the other 2 can go for a walk.
Yeah, completely. Well, I came into the picture sort of after it got this funding, and then they looked for a director within Cambridge, so I'm not entirely sure about like its state before, but I think there was much more book, much more interactions with the sins personally with CC. Yeah, and she had a bit longer to come to her conclusion that she reached at the end.
So you knew immediately you were coming for the Edinburgh version?
Yes.
And therefore it was going to be, 50 minutes an hour? It's 50 minutes, isn't
50
it?
minutes.
Yeah, very much a standard slot.
Yeah.
So were you involved in the editing? I mean, forgive me, when you came on board, what immediately did you think, right, I now got to do X, Y and Z?
So immediately when I came on board, the first job was to kind of like think of a vision for the show. Like visually, how did I want choreography to look? How did I want the clothes to look? Like the aesthetic, like how naturalistic were we going to go? That was kind of the first step. And then to move on to stuff like casting and like looking for a prod team to do like a set and lights and that kind of approach. And from then the editing of the script and stuff came for me more cast-led, from in rehearsals, seeing what felt right, what felt more natural to say another way, and just making little changes from them almost, so that the actors can find their most normal way into the lines and whatever feels most right for them and their understanding of the character as well.
It's the collaborative element of any good piece of art, isn't it? And actually that you've got views and visions as director for the cast, but the cast will bring what they have themselves to the the rehearsals or the workshops or whatever it is, from which a sensible director can then feed back, and then it's hopefully a virtuous circle, isn't it?
Well, the best actors and the best performers are going to think about their own role themselves and find their way in and decide how they want to behave and how they want to approach it. And it's the joy of having multiple opinions as well, and like multiple ideas is between them. You can find something that like really works and is really exciting. Completely. Yeah.
Without naming names, were there any divergent approaches which needed to be smoothed, or did you find actually everyone was at least on the same page and could be quite, I'm not going to say the word corral, that's a terrible word, but could be brought together to make the synthesis?
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
I mean, I suppose the question would be more nicely asked, were there any paths not travelled?
Paths not travelled?
It may be that they weren't.
I'm not too sure. I think we wanted to find somewhere between sort of musical theatre acting and like play acting, or like my background as a director this is the first musical I've been involved in. I've only done sort of plays, and we've got a mixture of cast who have done plays before and cast who always do musicals, and I think that finding sort of a level of acting between like naturalism and sort of going a bit more over it with like the stuff, finding the middle ground with that, I think has been heightened naturalism has been really interesting, and such a collaborative effort, because it's such a different experience directing a musical or putting a musical on to a play. So having everyone and their unique understandings of like what's going to come across and what's going to resonate like come through, I think was really helpful. Like for Light On, the one of the numbers, I was completely stumped, as was Fionn, the choreographer, of to what to do with it, because we were like, it's not quite, you shouldn't quite be dancing, but we want something to happen. And then Tabitha, one of our cast members, was like, I know what to do, we can all help her get home in the house, clean up, read together, and it was lovely. So I think the collaborative element of that has been really nice.
I also thought that was a very clever way of clearing the stage before the minimal time you've got for a strike.
Yes.
The set, I thought, they've cleaned as they've gone. It's marvellous.
Oh yeah, that's the final number, but absolutely.
Oh, you meant elsewhere, but even so, that happens as a kind of Cece is singing her final number, explaining sort of where she's reached, her new position on the spectrum, if you like. But actually, yes, but I took it to symbolise that actually the work was had been done by the Seven Deadly Sins, and their physical presence was no longer quite so needed, and therefore they were wrapping away her old world, which was grandmother's table and grandmother's sofa, and but also, as I say, it then had the benefit of you got to the end, and suddenly the furniture was already in the wings waiting to go upstairs.
Yes.
Clever.
Well, the ending's deliberately left ambiguous. I think there's a lot of readings you can take from it of like what literally happens next, but yeah, we get to see Cece on her own, able to like occupy space and have fun. And it helps our 5-minute get out that we have after the show as well.
Every little helps, as they say. Now, you said something very interesting just now. You were talking about the difference between directing a, for want of a better word, straight play and a musical, and that you hadn't necessarily had the experience of a musical before. What are those differences? Because there are some people who hold not, apart from the fact, some people hold that a musical, and that's such a broad term for so many different kinds of shows with music, are essentially still plays with music, even when they are fully fledged musicals. I'm not saying there's a right or wrong answer here, but obviously there's more to contend with, because you've got an orchestra and you've got, or in this case, recorded music, but even then there are cues, and you've got other things going on. It's different lighting for a song than you might have in a dialogue piece. I'm just genuinely interested from your perspective.
Well, I think it really depends. Like, I don't know if this is a production I saw in Cambridge, directed by someone called Neve, that's fantastic, called Enron, and it's like a play with music is very much how it's advertised, and it's to me it was incredibly done, and it was a play and there were songs and they did it fantastically. But I think for me there's like a step between that. You can do a play with music like that, you can also do a play, and then some musicals I think could be kind of that really naturalistic like play way in. But for something like this, if it was completely naturalistic and then suddenly everyone's singing, I think it wouldn't quite flow. You need that link in to, there's already the suspense of belief that they're not going to see hypernaturalism when everyone's singing and dancing. So
or you're seeing 7 personifications of a deadly 7
well,
sins.
exactly. Yeah. So it's like if everyone's just been crawling around the stage and like moving in these weird ways, I think that influencing their behavior in the real world and like how they're gonna interact and hold themselves and what they're gonna do is nice. I don't want them to snap out and suddenly be like completely normal, if that makes sense.
Yes, I do. I think I understand what you're saying there. I mean, it is a heightened production, and there's something about the nature of the piece, but it couldn't, it's not a musicalised version of Three Sisters. It is its own piece, of course. Yes, I mean, I just wondered how that was, and has it whetted your appetite for further?
Pardon?
Has it whetted your appetite for further musicals?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
I've loved it. It's such a different experience, like as well, like being involved in directing stuff and creating the look of something. And like with a musical, you kind of decide how something looks in such a unique way. And
There's
like
a huge amount of visual in it.
Yeah.
Oddly. You think it isn't, but it is.
It is like because we have an amazing musical director, Gemma, who's done the sound of it, really. But the way it all looks and the way people move their bodies and stuff, I found so exciting to like create and think about, and I would love to get to do that again.
Well, and I hope you do, because actually it came across terribly well. And if you're telling me that's the first time you've done that kind of thing in this environment, then I think it's a great success.
Thank you so much.
I will say that your musical director has created a wonderful soundscape.
Yes,
It's more than just supporting the songs. It's got an atmosphere of its own. I think so much of it gels. I think that's the great thing about it. It is that I keep coming back to the word speakeasy, and I know it's probably not the right word at all.
No, I agree.
But it's got that. It's got both. Oh gosh, it's got that balance between looseness and propriety. Actually, funny enough, because they're there to do the good, but they're doing it in a slightly offbeat, shall we say, way.
Yes.
And the dancing helps with that kind of sort of. Sauciness is not the right word, but there is a kind of looseness, I think.
I think it's interesting what you said before about like the feel of the like slight sort of sexiness of it all, slinkiness of it all, because it's not, I wouldn't describe it as inspired by burlesque, but that's one of my favourite kind of categories of dance. And I think that burlesque is all about this like subversion of expectation and of norm in quite like an empowering way. And I think there's maybe some of that in this, of like subverting these negative stereotypes of the sins and them embracing the kind of like the like slight menace that the names possess whilst actually being a force for good. Which I think can bring out that kind of like slinky feel as well, because it's like a little bit naughty, even though it is overall like positive.
Yes. Well, I mean, yes, there's still the possibility of if they pitch it wrong, they could easily project CC off into the wrong kind of level of wrath, and etc. I was going to say lust, but I try not to too often in public. So, now, choreography. Now, you said that your favoured area of expertise in choreography is movement, rather than dance choreography.
I have a lot more experience with movement directing,
But obviously this is a strange hybrid in a way, isn't it? Because there is dance, and quite a lot of it, but also there is movement of the characters, which is part of their personality and also part of how they operate when they're working together collectively in 2s, 3s and 4s, I suppose. But how did that mesh with your co-choreographer? It's really interesting to me that you've come at it once again from slightly different positions, hopefully to create this fusion meal.
I think Fiona and I worked so well together. It was such a lovely experience, because also I came in like ready to direct kind of like a movement workshop, and Fiona also came in with extensive like musical choreography like experience, which was just such a useful combination. But then by the end of it, I think that the dance choreography was pretty split, the movement was pretty split, and it was just nice to have two pairs of eyes and hands to like create these phrases and tie them together with each other and use bits of each other's like language or choreography style in our own. So I found that such an amazing experience and so much fun as a way in as well.
And what has it taught you?
What's it taught me?
Well, every good experience should teach someone who's an expert should hopefully get something out of it.
No, completely. I mean, it's taught me like everything I now know about how to approach a musical, about this, like basically everything I've said in this interview I've learned from this experience, to be honest. Like, it's not stuff I came in knowing. And also, like, I think I've learned a lot about how to like speak, like when you to be aware of the stuff that you don't know or that other people will have more experience of, and like where to lean on people. And I think something lovely about directing a musical is that it's so much more collaborative than directing a play, and that you'll always have an assistant director, but also like having a musical director who's just a complete expert in this, having writers that are really involved, having choreographers. Like it's such a group effort. There's really not one figurehead, which I think is such a lovely way to approach something.
So the director isn't God, as sometimes referred to in a straight play. The director is one of a number of gods.
I think the director's never God, but especially not in a musical. Yeah.
So I'd just like to explore then once again the songs a little, if I may. The lyrics.
Yes.
Now, where did the lyrics come from? Was it the composer and composers who have been together, or was it other writers? I mean, how did that come to be?
Between Joshua, who's the composer, and Gabrielle, who's written the book, I think it's both of them, is my understanding.
Bit of co-lyricism.
Yes, I think so.
Well, I always think that's quite nice, actually, because once again, it helps cohere a book to its score. Which isn't always the case. I've seen a few shows, and I'm not going to name them, where you can see, they've shipped in a songwriter, and that can work. Right. Mm-hmm. You know, if everyone's simpatico, but not everyone always is, or there's not enough time to blend. Mm-hmm. But this had that sense. And there are some nice flourishes, as I say. I think I mentioned one earlier, you know, towards the end, where it's identified that the sins are good, as it were. But what is the future for this piece?
I think currently the future for this piece is incredibly uncertain, other than that everyone really wants it to have a future.
So nothing scheduled, but it has the potential. It has legs to go somewhere further.
It has legs to go further, and everyone would really, really love for it to maybe get to return to its full-length form, or just to continue in some way. I think it's such an exciting musical, and Gabrielle and Joshua have created this amazing sound and these gorgeous characters, and I do really hope it gets to go further. I hope that us as a company and as a cast and directorial team are getting to push this off into the world where it continues on. It would be amazing if it could.
Funny enough, I can sort of see a sequel, because I really like the characters of the Seven Sins, and it sort of feels, without getting too cheesy, but you could put them in other situations with other people who need help with other problems in their lives.
Living with Sin, the series.
Well, sort of, yes, absolutely. And also, there's also, the great thing about it is you could totally do, there are some where actually there will be big tragedies and disasters, but also it's got enormous potential comedically.
Yes.
I mean, it's, funny enough, just a tiny flavour of Ghosts, the television sitcom, if you get my drift. Normal people surrounded by abnormal things. In this case, sins.
Yeah.
But I like the flavours coming out of it anyway. So yes, maybe I'll see you here next year with, as you say,
with the sequel.
Seven Deadly Sins. I don't know what would you call it, in Devon, or on the holiday, or
amazing. Yes. Christmas special or something.
Well, I really enjoyed this show, and I'm very keen to
you.
see, hopefully, that it might move again, but also to find out more about Cumps and the work it's going to be doing in the future, knowing it has this long heritage. So how can people find out about it who have made the mistake of not coming to Edinburgh this year? So
the show's got... Living with Sin has its own website, which is livingwithsin.com. And
can't argue with that, can you?
We're on social media as Living W Sin. On Instagram, Twitter, everything. Cumps also has its own Instagram. The username escapes me, but it's very easy to find if you find ours. And you can track shows that Cumps are doing on something called CamDram, which is like a Cambridge database of people and companies doing different shows. So if you search CamDram and then search in CUMTS, that stuff will come up as well.
And your ambition is to continue in the field of directing, isn't it?
Yes.
And all that entails, which is an enormous amount. So let's have your name again, just so that people can find you in the future to hire you.
Well, that would be amazing. My name's Ilona Sell.
And do you want to spell that?
Yeah, ILONASELL.
Yes, there are a number of selling ways, aren't there? Splendid. Well, it's been lovely to speak to you. It's been a wonderful show to see.
Thank you.
And I genuinely hope it has somewhere further to go, because it certainly deserves to. It certainly deserves to.
Thanks.
So thank you very much.
This has been a lovely interview. Thank you so much. And I'm going to pass all of your compliments along to the cast and writers and everyone involved.
Please do.
Yeah.
No. Everyone in here deserves all the praise they can get, to be honest.
Thank you.
Don't be shy, I won't
the steam up. I'll help you copy all your DMs. If the world that surrounds you will not put you first, say fuck 'em, get living and learn your self-worth. Try me.
I have seen all the work you produce, overworked, underpaid, desperate to prove to those who ignore all the time you put in. You'll burn yourself out for a job that won't care for you. If your work undervalues you, draining your health, then let me show you how to invest in yourself. Try me.
You deserve to feel good once in a while.
To let down your hair
Without the guilt,
without a care.
you've clocked in the hours.
Put in the work and sown the seeds.
Yet nothing is growing. We have the answer you don't know you need.
You want
You
it,
want it.
we've got it.
We got it.
Just take it.
You should try a little.
This deal
This deal
is real.
is real.
Let's make it.
You should try. Try to play nice. Let us know no dice. You should try. Try a little. Some might say comparison is the thief of joy. But if you covet my acts, I will give you the lot. Bring you bags and bags for a life of joy. Don't worry about competition. I'll teach you to focus your vision. Bring me your envy. I'll keep it healthy. With a teacher like me, you'll be set free. Through all this progress, I'll be the fuel that helps you grow. Let me nourish you, be the one to feed you when your blood sugar is low. I'll make you proud to install the non-fresh production strong enough food. Roast potatoes with gravy, cook some pudding or two. Roast every weekend. No more crumbs, you deserve the whole cake. These small bites, well, they just will not do. Have you heard the good news in your life? It's official, you're special, and we have arrived. You want it, got it. Just take it. You should try a little. This deal is real. You should try. Try to play nice, let us do nice. You should try a little.
Job's getting shitter, but you say you're no quitter. Are you paid to argue with white men on that Twitter? What would your plan be? Your dream that you can't see? A hopeful young human who's slowly consumed by her rage. You can't just fight fire with ire. The bullshit in the world just gets higher. So CC, slow down. You can't change the world when you're angry. There's strength in your passion. I see what you can be. Try me.
On those days when you're bored and you're lonely, on those nights feeling cold in your bones, you might reach for these apps to get swiping. Step back from the fuckboys and put down your phone. I can help you to find validation in all the things that you already are. You'll discover it's a privilege to know you, and boys must do better than texting at night. Are you up?
You deserve better head in your life. To get yours is not shameful or rude. We're your gift that keeps giving all night. Your inherited house of music till you lie.
What the actual fuck? It's 4 a.m. You should all be sleeping and getting... Oh shit, are we doing that song we rehearsed where we introduce ourselves one by one? And have I missed my verse? Oh, come on, one of you could have woken me. Fine, where are we? Bar 83? Okay.
Poor CC never could believe the person she might one day be. If only she'd known what her grandma
know, the deadly ones, except we don't use that term. Anyway, we've lived in this house for a while now, and we're here for Grandma. But now we're here for you. So we're just gonna do another chorus with an extra harmony, and then you can get your 8 hours and we'll resume in the morning, okay?
Poor Cece never stood believe the person she might one day be. You should try. Only she known what her grandma had known. I guess it's our job to count the seeds. You should try to make us better. You should try a little sin.
And there we are, a third song from this incredibly strong score, from this incredibly strong show. The song was called Try, and it's the third song that we've heard today from Living with Sin. And my thanks to Ilona Sell for giving me time in Edinburgh to talk about this show, and also to Gabrielle James and Joshua Newman for writing it, and for giving permission through Ilona for us to play those 3 songs in today's episode. Now, in an interview, Gabrielle James, one of the writers, has said that she sees the show, and I quote, as a Faustian queer eye. And actually, I think that's quite a deft description of what the show was trying to do, and which it succeeded in doing, in my opinion. It wasn't, as I say, a finished show. I'd love to see the whole thing, and maybe, just maybe, I'll have a chance to talk again with some people behind this excellent show. But even if it doesn't go any further, then I hope the people behind it do. But do keep your eye out for Living with Sin, in case it turns up again. And, although I say so myself, for my money, it has the potential to be better than 6. And that's saying something. But when you come to the end of an episode, as we are now, I think, it's actually the not saying something which is rather more important. In fact, there's an entire week of me not saying something for you to enjoy before the next episode comes out. And what an episode the next episode is, because it's our 800th episode since we started all that time ago in 2006. Seems unbelievable. 800 episodes in the can, all still available for you to enjoy on the Musical Talk website if you want to go back and bathe in 799 other episodes. So please do join us next week for a really rather wonderful celebratory episode marking our 800th, where we'll be jumping on the bandwagon of artificial intelligence to see if it can generate some interesting topics for debate. And perhaps more interestingly, whether the non-artificial non-intelligence of those of us who were in the room at the time of the recording of the episode can meet the challenge of those questions even more interestingly. Do join us for that. But for the time being, let me just finish this episode with the one favourite word that people crave to hear from me, not only here on Musical Talk, but in real life. And that's, and here it comes, goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk, edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2023, except for the songs where the copyright remains with the creators. And my thanks go to everyone involved in Living with Sin for allowing us to play these wonderful songs in this episode. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at Musical Talk Thos. So sorry.
No, don't worry.
That's the heat of the day.
It's nice and hot today.
Oh, it's not nice, but it is hot.
Oh well, I can
no.
give you a Living with Sin fan if you want. I'll fly it.
Oh, do you want me to walk down the mile with it? That's very kind.
Fanning
Thank you.
yourself.
Actually, that is rather lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's kind. No, it's just so easy to dehydrate. I've never known an Edinburgh like this.